Today, I have the great pleasure of speaking with Jen Long. She wrote the book Own Up: How to Hold People Accountable Without All the Drama. She's helping organizations to put accountability into practice. Amazing conversation. You're going to learn a lot of concrete tips that you can apply in your own business. Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Business of Meaning podcast. And today we're going to talk about leadership. We're going to talk about accountability, about guiding principles, about psychological safety, all those very important elements. And we're going to do that with three person in one. Some people call her Jen, other people call her Jenny, and the third one, to whom she owns money, as she told me, call them Jennifer. Anyway, Jennifer Long is a certified master coach. She's the CEO of Own Up. She is helping teams and organization about leadership, about getting results. She is coaching those teams in a large organization and also individuals. And I'm delighted to speak with her because she also has a book called Own Up. And we're going to talk about everything. How are you, Jen?
I am great. And I am very happy to be here and have a conversation with you. So thanks for having me.
No, with great pleasure. And then, as I said, when I heard that your book is How to Hold People Accountable Without All the Drama, I said, oh, first, getting people accountable, great. But without the drama, I want to know.
Exactly. I'm on a mission to help people be good at accountability without all of the pain and suffering and worry and anxiety that I think tends to come with it. Because when we think about accountability, right, we personally think about it one way. We think, wow, it's about walking your talk. It's about showing up. It's about doing what you say you're going to do. It's about having clear expectations and meeting those expectations. And it all seems very straightforward. But in our work environment, when we talk about accountability, we tend to have a feeling that what they want is results and outcomes and things of this nature. And so when we're going to hold people accountable, it feels more like discipline and it feels like punishment than it does feel like anything else. And so my mission is to clarify that and to get people to understand that accountability isn't consequences. Consequences are consequences. Accountability is not punitive. That what it really is an act of clarity. And clear is kind, unclear is unkind. And so it's a practice around getting clear with people on who owns what.
Understood. Now, you said some people seeing it as discipline, and then you say punishment. I personally would think that I'm totally okay with discipline. Punishment is debatable, but I'm totally okay with discipline and concern. Or if you're getting anxiety because of discipline, how does that work in a working environment?
Well, right. But discipline is around the consequence thinking. And what you want to be able to do is most people come to work to do a good job. And when you're in that position of I'm disappointed about something, somebody's let me down, there's been a ball dropped, a miscommunication or whatever that is, to put it into a disciplined mindset shuts people down in the sense of that's where you get the shaming and the blaming and the defensiveness. And I think that's what keeps people from having really good conversations around accountability. When you come in to get clear, as opposed to come in to get straight, there's a different openness and connection that you can create. And that's where your culture starts to shift radically. And when you can talk about miscommunications and drop balls, because those are going to happen regardless, right? You're working with people and people make mistakes. When you can have the conversations on a regular basis in a way that creates psychological safety and clarity, your willingness to do it goes up. Your relationships get stronger and your performance gets better because it's more part of how you work as opposed to a place you have to go to get over something, right? That a lot of people will avoid, put off, which creates the workarounds and the things where problems sit for a long time until you actually have the conversation because you were so wrapped around the axle about actually getting it done.
And you mentioned psychological safety. I always thought from the point of view that there is no safe space. There are safe people that create a safe environment. And linked into that, it's always a challenge somehow to create that environment where it's okay to disagree, it's okay to ask questions, it's okay to be challenged from the moment it's not, it's not something targeted at the individual. And so how do you balance that with today where sometimes it seems that a lot of people are immediately offended if you're asking tough questions or if you are going back to what you agree at the beginning?
Well, because the approach, what triggers people, what makes it psychologically unsafe is when you're being judged and criticized. And so much of what people are just doing is throwing out judgment, throwing out criticism, and throwing out just, you suck at this, you need to sort that out. And it's not a connection point, right? Whereas, and psychological safety happens between people. So it's definitely something that we create for each other. So what that says is, I won't judge you and I won't criticize you. And if I'm really good at accountability, I'm not coming in with judgment. And that's always an aha for people when I'm training them, because I'm like, let's start with what do we need to stop? And the first thing we need to stop is stop coming in with judgment. I was in your job, so I know what went wrong. And so I know what you're doing and I have an opinion about it. And so here's what you need to go do. And that doesn't help people. The result of that is people don't think critically anymore because you're just coming in and saying, here's what you need to do. And because we don't like being judged, right, our response is what I would call malicious compliance. We get to a place of, I'm only going to give you kind of the bare minimum because I don't feel like you deserve anything better than that because you're so judgy. And it's painful.
Interesting.
Yeah. There's a lot in the human dynamic, right? When you are in judging and criticism, people are if that's how you're showing up. I don't have a problem with discipline. I don't have a problem telling you. I don't have a problem with any of that because I understand what's happening, which means I'm making judgments and assumptions. Then the other person is automatically, and we're kind of wired anyway to self-protect, right? Am I safe? Am I not safe? Is kind of the first thing your brain does when your boss shows up on the Zoom, or when their number shows up on the caller ID, right? That is something we're looking at and really, really concerned about. So when we're in defensiveness, we aren't in a place of problem solving. We're in a place of our brains, actually, all of our critical thinking moves toward, how do I defend myself in this moment versus how do I get to a place of problem solving? And problem solving lives in a place of mutuality, and problem solving lives in a place of openness and trust. So you can see how you shut people down when you come in with judgment, and they're going to go. We're wired to protect, so we do. And you got to learn to read the room better. So that's why you just can't start there.
Understood. How did you get to that field of work? What's your journey, and how did you come up with the book Own Up?
So I am second generation in my business. Own Up is, we changed the name just a couple of years ago after I wrote the book. And I used to work, my mom started the company ages ago, and so I worked with her all throughout college and whatnot, and used to do research and development for training programs. And I also at the same time was directing theater. And so as a theater director, the focus is on dialogue. It's on conversation. You are mapping a conversation in real time to create relationships and dynamics right on stage. And so when you pair that kind of experience and focus with training and development around communication skills and managing people, it kind of evolved into you can't just teach them the theory and the understanding. Managers need to embody this, and they need to be able to talk in a way and communicate in a way that actually embodies what they're trying to achieve, what real communication looks like in tougher situations, and what do you need from someone, and how do you communicate that in a way that's heard well. And so out of that came the model that you'll see in the book, the performance drivers, and the choice points diagram is a direct result of the collaboration that I had with my mom relative to adult learning, applied learning, and theater on how to engage that kind of stuff. So
Wow.
Yeah, that's kind of the
That's unique.
recipe here. Yeah, yeah. And as we continue on, it just continues to evolve over time. And the more you practice with organizations over time, you start to really understand not only is the practice in the moment the thing, but the coaching that comes behind it, right? So what a lot of the work is that we do involves one-on-one coaching sessions specifically around what's your performance issue, and let's practice how you're going to go do that.
Mm,
Because that muscle memory of conversation, right, where you talk about rehearsal time,
yeah,
is not only you got to know your lines, you got to know your intention, so that when you get live in front of breathing people, that energy that comes in, that connection, when you got eyeballs, it's going to make a difference in how you actually show up. And I always ask people in the learning environment, have you ever had a conversation where you're like, I'm going to go hold that guy accountable and we're going to have a come to Jesus about this because I'm sick and tired of whatever it is he's doing. And then you go in and you open your mouth and you don't have the conversation you're expecting at all. And that's because people don't really think through before they go do that, how they want to frame it, how that person might respond.
absolutely. That's a great point. You're also talking about aligning with the organizational value. So I come from the assumption that we have an organization, we have values with this organization where you lead based on values, you fire based on those values, you really live and breathe based on those values. And the assumption is if you're working in this organization, you are aligned with those values and your work is also aligned with those values. Now, you say that you have one-on-one conversation with people that have performance issues. Where is the link between there is a member of the team that has performance issues and is not being accountable to themselves
Right.
first, but to the organization? So,
Right.
how does that work to combine it with a safe environment and making sure that you have a constructive conversation?
Yeah, and values are a primary driver in how people show up, right? So you have your organizational values, you have your personal values, right? And part of being lined up in the organization is that you share some values, right? So we talk about shared values and what that is. And the idea to understand in terms of accountability and how does that conversation play out is, what is a value? A value is something we deem to be important, right? So company values are about it's the company saying this is what we see as important. And when you are having a frustration with somebody, you know it's about a value when there's a conflict around what they see as important and what you see as important. And
Mm,
how is that manifesting, right, in how they are performing? And so what you have to take out of the equation is, do I have a behavioral issue?
mm,
Is this a self-destructive behavior? Are they an over controller? Is there some behavior that's in the way where they're showing up out of line from a values perspective? Because that's the first thing you want to understand, because a behavior shift is the closest thing to shifting performance to get them where you need them. Is it a skill problem? Do they not have good relationship skills? Do they not have good communication skills? Do they not have, whatever skills they need to be able to engage the role effectively? If they have the behaviors and they have the skills, right? Are they choosing not to engage them for some reason? That's where you have an attitude problem, right? So people who are habitually tardy tend to live in the attitude problem because they've got behavior, they can get there on time. They've got the skills to drive the car, to take the bus, all the things. So they're just choosing not to. And so what's that about? Right. But value skills can show up in things like, you give me direction and I choose to do different things. Right. Or I choose to do it in a different way, or I don't respect the relationships, but I give you the results. And so it's important to understand. And I think this is part of the art when you learn to get really good at accountability, is to really identify accountability starts with you, right?
yes.
And you have to be able to identify, what is your issue? What is the expectation this person isn't meeting? And is it about a conflict of what's important, right? I keep seeing a pattern of you choosing to do things differently than how we want them done, right? In the how of, you don't respect the relationships, you don't respond to emails, and you don't talk to people in a courteous way. There would be a list of things, right, that would go against, right, if it's a people first value or something, where they choose results over relationships. And so
Mm,
you have to be able to articulate, right? And it's a different conversation. My approach when I speak to someone about behaviors and skills is more around coaching and developing. Whereas if I'm going to have a conversation with someone where we're conflicted around beliefs and values, and beliefs being what you hold to be true, and that's a different conversation, and is what I hold to be true versus what you hold to be true. That's a different level versus what's important and not important. But those are both more of a counseling conversation, because it's not that you don't have the skills and behaviors. It's you're not lining up with things we know you're capable of. And so framing that is a different thing, because it's more about the conflict. And I have to be clear that it's a conflict in how we're showing up together. And I have to own the fact that this is the value conversation. We're in conflict about what's important. Impact of that is whatever it might be. And talk to me about how you see it, because they have to recognize and own that they have that values conflict, that they are in fact in the behavior I'm describing, in the pattern I'm describing, and go, I didn't see it as that, but now I do. And when you're in conflict, it's not about problem solving. It's about how long do you want to do that? It's a timing. How long do you want to be in conflict? Because I can't get you out of conflict. If you think that's important, then the question really becomes, is that a choice you want to continue to make? Because if it is, what that tells me is we're not a good fit. And is that something we want to fight? And when people don't have the wherewithal to recognize that the real issue is a conflict of value, they're not having the conversations about the right things. They're making it into a skill or behavior. And like, you need to go to time management because, or a relationship building course, when they don't care, right? They're like, I'm in it for me and I need to get this done and I want to get promoted. And so that's my pattern. And that's the conversation you should be having, as opposed to, let me put you in a relationship building skills course.
It makes total sense. I'm listening to you, and yes, it makes 150% sense. And I cannot help but think about my personal experience in different working environment. And also, I plan meetings for corporate 150 countries for 20 years. And I could see specific organization where you have one of the highest IQ you can think of and the lowest EQ, emotional intelligence. And to do what you just mentioned, for me, you clearly need a lot of emotional intelligence.
Well, you got to have first self-reflection, right? To stand in accountability, you have to think it through first, because it starts with you. You've got to get clear, right? And because it's a practice around clarity, you have to get clear on what it is for you. And as soon as you understand your own level of clarity, then you can start to understand, what is the context for this other individual? What am I seeing and not seeing do I have unstated expectations that I haven't put out there? Or have I been really, really clear? Because sometimes we just assume, right? It's just part of the job. They should know. They should know they should be in the company values, or how this thing is connected. But maybe I've never said that. Maybe I've never connected the dot. There's a lot of leaders who don't really express to people, these are some guiding principles when you work with me that are important in how we do work together. And so when I do a lot of work with teams, there's a lot of working agreement work that has to get done, because if we don't specify what it means to be a good teammate, then everybody's just bringing their own understanding of what that is for them.
Right.
Which is how you get out of alignment on what's important.
No, and I was more
stated.
Yeah, I was thinking about, I got to give you the extreme example of it. It's laughable, but I've seen it so many times. It's the difference between, Jen, this is the issue. Tell me what you think about it. And then I shut up and listen. Or, Jen, this is the issue. I believe we should do this. What do you think?
Which is usually what people do. And so if you're my boss and you say, here's the issue and here's what we should do, my tendency is to go, well, absolutely, let's do that. And it's not my idea. And at no time did you give me an opportunity to say, you know what, here's how I see it, here's how I think about it, and here's what I'm going to own relative to that.
Exactly.
And so people lose the frame that accountability is a conversation. It's not just you getting off your chest what's bugging you about what's going on. And I think people run to the knowing and dictating and criticizing version of that, which is why accountability feels so uncomfortable, because people automatically, we're going to go to defensive reasoning. I don't want to look bad. I don't want to be judged. I don't want to act like I don't want to be seen as incompetent. So I go to defensive reasoning because of how it's presented to me. Whereas if you come in and say, here's my concern, here's what I want to talk about, here's what I'm experiencing, here's the impact it has, and I'm really curious to understand how you see it. And I do that without judgment, and it shows up in my tone, that shows up in my language, and I create space to understand, do they own, what's their response to that? Do they go, God, I haven't thought about it that way, and I can see why you would be frustrated with me, which feels like ownership, versus, yeah, I got it. Okay. And then I walk away.
Oh. Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's not ownership. And I think we mistake things like, yeah, got it, boss. And then I go off and talk to my pals. I'm like, oh, for crying out loud. And there's no sense, there's no so what in the conversation. And when there's an arc to accountability, it's not just, did I own where I screwed up? It's, did I own where I screwed up or made a bad decision or showed up poorly or didn't deliver? Do I own what I'm going to do about it? And do I own the fact I'm going to put effort behind that? And what's that going to look like? And when are we talking about it again? Because accountability conversations always have a so what? So what, now what?
That's a very good point. One thing I discovered, I'm originally from Belgium and moved to the US 11 years ago. And the last team I built for another company, I realized that talking about psychological safety and also getting feedback and buy-in from people. When I would ask, what do you think? There was almost no disagreement. And when I was used in the past disagreeing or having people in my team disagreeing, because it's okay, you're expressing yourself, and then we come to a consensus, or yes, at the end of the day, a leader has to make a decision, fine, but everybody can chip in and say what they think. It took me, I want to say, at least 3 to 4 months to come to a point where people would feel completely comfortable to disagree or to express their opinion that might not be the same as the other, understanding that it was nothing personal, but we're trying to find the best solution.
Right. So the disagreement is the journey to clarity and mutuality.
Yes. So is this something that is typically an American culture in business, or is it depending on individual?
I think it's dependent on individual and leadership style. I think there are people who are wired to be more direct, more results-based, create less space for disagreement, create less space, right? How secure is this person as a leader? They're going to shut down disagreement if they're not secure in what they know and what they're, right? There's a whole bunch of stuff. I think the American culture, and I've learned this as I've trained in different cultures, our style and our approach, I teach something called concise language, where you really narrow a focus when you're dealing with performance issues. You really kind of want to pare it down so that you're talking about the right thing. And it feels very direct. And so people who tend to have a softer approach tend to be more accommodating, right? That kind of style in those cultures, which I find, like the Germans are this way, which you wouldn't think is a thing, but they're not comfortable in direct language.
Yeah.
And that's a cultural, it breaks rules there to be that direct. It feels unfriendly. And so they're like, yeah, that's a typical American approach. And so, yes, Americans like direct.
Yeah, I do too. Yeah, absolutely.
Cut to the chase. So there's nuances as you go into how you set the stage and what that might mean. But you have to be careful to walk the line between empathy and judgment, right? Judgment's going to be way too direct, and empathy is going to be way too accommodating. And where you kind of ride the line between the two is where you want to find it relative to who you are as a person and relative to what works in your culture.
Although I agree with you that, but the example I have in mind is when we moved, I said, okay, I asking for direction, go left or right? And the person said, I'm not sure. Okay, I understand you're not sure, but would you go left or right? I say, I'm not sure. And I was getting annoyed by the, I'm not sure. Tell me, I don't know, or I would go there.
Yeah.
And then I also realized that, that I agree with you with the directness. And in those circumstances, it's almost like you don't want to admit that you don't know, that it would be bad. And so it's like less direct way of saying, I'm not sure, and I wouldn't want to take a guess. Just tell me something
Yeah.
that I can move.
Just tell me, because you have an expectation, right? If you're
Yeah.
part of a group and you're in everybody's got an expectation and an opinion. And voicing that is part of, and I think people are intimidated to step into their own power in that way, to say, look, well, here's what I would expect, that we would go right, because here's the implications of going right. And so that would be my expectation. I don't know how you guys see it, right? So being able to feel comfortable to have an expectation, because we all do. And being able, and when we get frustrated, even if it's not a leader direct report relationship, even peer-to-peer on teams, we all have expectations around our peers. And if we don't state what those are, that's how the relationships go south. That's how we do the workarounds. That's how we start to form, we start to tell ourselves stories in the dearth of clarity. If the clarity isn't there, we create the story that makes it clear for us.
Absolutely. That's very interesting. Yeah, that's very impressive what you're saying. And I could see how I think you have work to do for the next 500 years. But
Yeah. Yeah. It was funny. I was having a conversation earlier today and somebody's like, let's blame my parents. Let's blame my parents for everything. And I was like
right.
laughing because this is a skill set that starts at home.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
if you've got parents who are good at this, you're going to be better off. And if you don't, and you're in an environment where you can live in shame and blame and not talk to anyone about stuff and hold people accountable in your head, but never have a conversation and resent them later, right? If that's how that's going for you, by the time you get to work, it's going to matter. It's going to matter how you show up in this. And then the question was, why suddenly does it matter at work? And I was like, the answer to that is because people are paying you at that point. They're paying you to show up, and they're paying you to walk your talk, and they're paying you. And so when you don't, and you want to blame somebody else, no deal. That's how it gets broken. Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned something about the HOP principles and accountability, but I like the intersection
Oh,
between people and processes, because as much as I'm not a process guy at the beginning, I recognize that without processes, there is no
yeah.
way you can build a business. And without people, which are essential, there is no way you can build a business either. How do you combine both and link it to the principle of accountability?
Well, so I was introduced to the HOT principles by a guy named Dr. Todd Conklin, and he does a lot of work in organizational safety. And the HOT principles, and I'll just give you what they are so you can understand why I started to pull these into all of my work, because I thought, oh God, these are genius. So there's 5 principles. The first principle is that error is normal. People make mistakes. And so when you think about your processes, if you are expecting 100% efficiency and 100% effectiveness 100% of the time from an operator dependent process, your system is way too fragile, way too brittle, because people are going to make mistakes. And so how are you creating capacity in your processes for the inevitable failure that's going to happen? And how do you create capacity in that person in order to be more accountable about how they're addressing that? How am I in my process? Right. So that's the first one. The second principle is blame fixes nothing. So that when we are looking for whose fault is it, when we are looking for judgment, when we are looking for consequence, what are we really doing that's adding value versus really kind of having a better understanding, which leads to the third principle, which is context drives behavior. What is the context I put someone in order that they're making the decisions they're making? And what do I understand about their context so that I can see, right? So we talked a little bit about this when I talked about, is it a values issue? Is it a behavior issue? Is it a skill issue? I'm looking for context. At what point did this person make a decision where it fell over, right? They had all the good intentions, no skills, don't have relationship skills, a lousy communicator, can't, so can only give me certain behaviors because they don't have the skill set they need, right? And so when I understand that context, how I hold them accountable is a different conversation versus if they have all the skills and are choosing not to do it. So that's why context matters. And ownership from an organizational standpoint, when you think of it bigger, especially with the safety end of it, what is the organizational context? Am I setting my people up for success, or am I creating processes that demand things and putting in positions where they can only make risky decisions, right? So you got to think about that. The fourth principle is learning and improving are vital. And so when I talk about accountability conversations, always have a so what, now what? That applied learning and improving is the shift, is the performance improvement, is the this is how we get better. And so I'm not just asking you to be accountable for understanding your poor choice. I'm asking you also to be accountable about how do you get better? Because this is about performance improvement. The whole point of being accountable and being clear is that so you can do well and do better and make good choices more often than not. How do I get you there? And then the last principle, which is one of my favorites, is how leaders respond matters. So when you drop the ball, when you create the error, when we fail as a team, how do I respond to that? Because either we're either gonna learn and improve, or I'm gonna blame and punish. But I can't do both.
That's my favorite one, I would say. Linked to
Yeah. And so
makes all the difference there.
Yeah, and it really mirrors so much of the effort in the book when you put those principles on top. And I think what I love about it, because one of the first areas around accountability is your mindset, right? If your mindset is that it's punitive, you're never going to take on the skill set because your mindset eats your skill set. But if I can change somebody's mindset to understand that it's really a practice around clarity, and it's a practice. Some days you're going to do it great. Some days it's not going to be so great, right? But every feedback conversation is an opportunity to practice, right? So when I can create that shift in mindset, that makes a huge difference. And those HOP principles really help frame mindset as well. So that when I can show up and I know people are going to make a mistake, it's just part of the deal. We're not perfect. And if I'm expecting perfect, that's the first problem out of the gate. That's why it's got to start with me. Am I expecting perfection when I shouldn't be?
Interesting.
Unrealistic expectation. Yeah.
Yeah. You make me think of something else linked to that 100% of the time. And most of the people I know that have a business, especially in the meetings and event industry, have a major challenge. They all feel alone and overwhelmed, and they have a challenge to delegate something because they always said nobody's going to deliver exactly the way I would. But at the end of the day, if the customer is happy and 80% of what you do is delivered, it's fine. Instead of looking for the 100% all the time.
Right. And your job when you run a team or you lead people is to develop those people. You aren't the results person. They're the results people. They're delivering the result. Your result is how good am I at getting them to do that? How much capacity am I building in them to make good decisions? Is my team full of good critical thinking? And that's my measure, not their result. If my team can't make good decisions, that's my issue.
There's so many people I wish I would have known you to connect you with in the past. One in particular was like, there was an issue with a customer is that his team had to protect him instead of him protecting his team, which was, so
wrong, so backward.
Pathetic, but yeah, absolutely, it's totally backward. Jen, I'd like to finish this conversation, but again, I'm targeting mainly the business owners in the meetings and event industry. And as I was telling you before we started this conversation, you can have the greatest vision for your business, the greatest sales process, the greater plan, the greater team. If you don't have accountability, nothing's going to happen in the execution. What would you advise a small business owner in terms of accountability for themselves and for their company?
Right. So you have to be good at it first. You have to be the one who initiates the models, what it sounds like, what those conversations are. And like I say, it's a practice. Like it's like going to the gym. I'm going to teach you yoga. You're going to understand all the poses, but you are the one who has to practice those poses if you're going to maintain your flexibility and your joint health and all that kind of stuff. Same with communications. Communications is a practice. And as a coach, I can tell you the number one thing I coach all the time is how to communicate. And your conversations are your relationships. As you build your culture, how you speak to people, the tone you use, the language, how you come at them is the culture you're building. And clear is kind. If we are clear, people will only, you can never force accountability. People will only own what they're clear on. And it goes both ways. If I'm unclear, I should ask. And how you set that up at the very beginning is all about expectation. And so as business owners, as you get started, if you're assuming people should show up in a job and know some things about how to show up and work, what you get clear on who you are and how you roll and what's important to you, and communicate those as principles, as expectations, as values, and then talk about them. I'm seeing it, I'm not seeing it, right? It's just like the airport. See something, say something. I
Yeah.
see you show up like a way I'm not expecting, talk about that. So that there is always, and that consistency is what creates the trust, the psychological safety. I'm not going to judge you, but boy, I'm confused about what this is. And the confusion and the withdrawal is what starts to get a culture out of alignment, out of communication, out of understanding, out of mutuality, and out of trust. So it all comes with open your mouth and learn how to do it well.
Love it. And it's an ongoing process. Never stop with that.
It never stops. It's a constant, and it shifts. The bigger you get, the more people you have, the more for every person, the level of complexity increases.
Wonderful. Jan, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for all these insights. You have your book, Own Up, How to Hold People Accountable Without All the Drama. How do people get in touch with you?
They can find more information about me. My website is accountabilityatwork.com, and they can email me at jen.long@own-up.com, and they can buy a book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all the places you can get books, audio,
Wonderful.
Dead Tree, all of the versions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. Really appreciate it, Eric.
Jan, thank you so much for sharing this conversation with me. I really love the approach you have. It's very concrete and makes all the difference. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to connect with me, please go on LinkedIn or go on the website eventbusinessformula.com. And if you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with your network. Thank you. Bye-bye.